the last days of summer. By the middle of August, Andy had begun to feel that summer was slipping through his fingers. The first weeks of the holiday had seemed endless. There had been long mornings in bed, afternoons spent cycling around the neighbourhood, and evenings when he stayed outside until the sky turned dark. But now, whenever he looked at the calendar, he noticed how few days were left before school started again. Andy was not ready to return to his usual routine. One evening, while they were having dinner, his mother suddenly put down her fork and said, "Your father and I have been thinking, what if we went away for a few days before the holiday is over?" Andy looked up immediately. "Where?" His father smiled. "The Scottish Highlands." Andy had never been there before. He had seen photographs of dramatic mountains, enormous lochs and narrow roads winding through green valleys, but he had always assumed Scotland was somewhere he would visit when he was older. "Seriously?" "Seriously," his mother replied. "We could rent a small cottage for a week, somewhere quiet." Andy agreed before they had even finished discussing it. There was only one problem: Robertson. Robertson was Andy's orange Scottish fold cat, although Andy often joked that calling him a cat was an insult to his personality. Robertson spent most of his life sleeping, stretching himself across sofas and beds, or lying dramatically in the middle of the floor as though he owned the house. He was remarkably lazy. He was also, unfortunately, a troublemaker. Whenever Andy's family travelled, Robertson somehow managed to create a problem. Once he had escaped from his carrier at a motorway service station and hidden underneath a parked car. Another time he had knocked over an entire shelf of books during the night. Nevertheless, Andy could not imagine leaving him behind, so Robertson came to Scotland. The journey took several hours, but Andy hardly noticed the time. He watched the landscape gradually change through the car window. The familiar streets disappeared, followed by busy motorways, towns, and finally long stretches of countryside. As they travelled further north, the scenery became wilder. The hills grew taller, the roads became narrower. There were fewer houses, and enormous stretches of green land seemed to continue without interruption. Robertson, meanwhile, slept. "He has the easiest life in Britain," Andy said, looking at him in his carrier. His father laughed. "Wait until he wakes up." Their cottage stood near a small loch, surrounded by trees and hills. It was an old stone building with a wooden door, a fireplace, and windows that looked out towards the mountains. Andy fell in love with it immediately. That first evening they walked down to the loch. The air was cool and fresh, and the surface of the water reflected the mountains in the distance. Andy stood silently for a moment. "It doesn't feel real," he said. His mother smiled. "That's probably because you're used to looking at everything through a screen." Andy laughed, but he knew she had a point. The next morning he woke early and decided to explore the area. He packed some sandwiches, filled his water bottle, and put on his walking boots. Robertson followed him to the front door. "No," Andy said firmly. Robertson stared at him. "You're staying here." The cat sat down. Andy left. 20 minutes later he heard something behind him. He turned around. Robertson was following him. "You have got to be joking." The orange cat continued walking as if he had heard nothing. Andy tried to carry him back, but Robertson immediately wriggled free. Eventually, Andy gave up. The two of them continued along the path together. At first the walk was easy. They passed a small stream and climbed gently towards the hills. Robertson occasionally stopped to investigate bushes and stones, although most of the time he seemed more interested in finding somewhere comfortable to lie down. Then they reached a steeper section. Andy climbed carefully, while Robertson remained behind. "Come on, Robert!" The cat looked at him. Then he sat down. "You cannot be serious." Robertson simply closed his eyes. Andy burst out laughing. After a few minutes he picked him up and carried him to the top. The view was worth the effort. Below them, the loch stretched between the mountains like a sheet of glass. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, and the wind carried the smell of wet grass and pine trees. Andy sat on a rock and ate his sandwich. For the first time in weeks, he did not feel the need to check his phone. He simply watched. During the following days, the family explored the Highlands together. They visited a small village, walked along the edge of another loch, and stopped at a roadside cafe where Andy discovered that hot chocolate tasted much better after several hours of walking. One afternoon, they decided to follow a less familiar path. The weather had been bright when they left, but within an hour, thick clouds had gathered over the mountains. It might rain, Andy's father warned. They continued for a little while, but soon the wind became stronger. Then the rain arrived. They hurried back towards the cottage, laughing as they tried to protect themselves with their jackets. By the time they reached the door, they were completely soaked. Robertson was waiting inside. He looked at them. Then he looked at the rain outside. Then he calmly walked over to the warm fireplace and lay down. Andy stared at him. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" Robertson closed his eyes. That evening, they sat around the fire, drinking tea and telling stories about the day's adventure. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Andy realized that these were exactly the kinds of moments he would remember. Not the expensive places, not the perfect weather. Just sitting with his family in a small cottage in the Highlands while his ridiculous orange cat slept beside the fire. On their final morning, Andy woke before everyone else. He walked outside alone. The mountains were covered in pale morning mist. Everything was quiet. Somewhere in the distance he could hear birds singing. Summer was nearly over. Normally that thought would have made him miserable, but this time he felt different. He had spent the last part of his holiday somewhere completely unfamiliar. He had walked further than he expected, got caught in the rain, discovered new places, and somehow shared an adventure with a cat who would probably sleep through most of it. When Andy returned to the cottage, Robertson was sitting by the door. Andy picked him up. "You know," he whispered, "I think I'll miss this place." Robertson yawned. Andy laughed. "Of course you don't care." A few hours later, they began the journey home. As the Highlands disappeared behind them, Andy looked out of the window one last time. The holiday was ending, but somehow that no longer bothered him. He had learned that the best part of a summer holiday was not making every day exciting. Sometimes it was simply having enough time to slow down, look around and realize how much there was to enjoy. And of course, having a mischievous orange cat along for the journey helped. Key vocabulary and expressions. Slip through your fingers, to disappear or pass very quickly, especially before you have had the chance to enjoy or appreciate it. Endless, seeming to continue for a very long time without stopping. It can be used literally or to describe a period of time. Winding through, following a route that curves and turns rather than going in a straight line. Remarkably lazy, extremely or unusually unwilling to make an effort or be active. Remarkably adds emphasis. A troublemaker, someone or something that frequently causes problems or gets involved in mischief. Wriggle-free, to escape from someone's grip or from something holding you by moving your body with small, twisting movements. Worth the effort. Describes something that is valuable or enjoyable enough to justify the time, energy, or difficulty required. Gather over. Used when clouds or darkness gradually form or collect above a particular place. Got caught in the rain. To unexpectedly be outside when it starts raining, especially without being properly prepared for it. Slow down, to become less hurried or busy and take more time to relax, think, or appreciate what is happening.
Want more stories like this? Subscribe and stay tuned.